Hello students, welcome to EPG Parshala. I am Dr. S.P. Sood, retired Associate Professor and Head, Department of Library and Information Science, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. Today we are going to talk on module Choice and Rendering of Headings, Resolving Conflict of Authorship in CCC and AACR-2R under paper Knowledge Organizational Structure Cataloging. This module is contributed by Prof SS Agarwal, retired professor and head, Department of Library and Information Science, Bikram University, Ujjain. In this module, you will be introduced to the concept of author in cataloging. There are several access points of the users to find out a document in a library through the catalog. To most of the users, the name of the author is the main access point to find out the document. Hence, it is imperative for a cataloger to know the concept of author. This module aims to familiarize the prospective catalogers to this concept as well as the concept of conflict of authorship. Objectives. The main objective of this module is to introduce to you the concept of author. After studying, you should be able to know what is meant by an author in cataloging, that is the concept of author. Different kinds of author from the point of view of cataloging. The problem of conflict of authorship of various kinds. How these various kinds of conflicts are resolved according to CCC and AACR-2R. In spite of the current popularity of the subject approach, as an user requires material on a particular specific subject irrespective of author, the author approach has remained the most used approach of the readers. Hence, it is the primary function of the cataloger to satisfy this approach. For this purpose, he has to identify clearly the person or corporate body who is the author of a particular document. His understanding of the concept of authorship will enable him to choose the correct name as the basis of heading. Most of the documents are created by persons. In several cases, more than one person are found involved with a particular work. Hence, it becomes difficult whether the credit of authorship should be given to this person or that person. This gives rise to conflict of authorship between persons. It is named as conflict between person versus person. Nowadays, quite a number of documents are emanated by corporate bodies such as government, institutions, societies, and conferences, etc. In some cases of such documents, also the conflict of authorship arises. This conflict is known as corporate body versus corporate body. In a number of documents, the names of persons as well as corporate bodies appear in the title pages. Here, the cataloger has to decide whether the authorship goes to the person or corporate body. This conflict is named as person versus corporate body. In most of the catalog codes, the guidance is provided to resolve these conflicts. In this module, we are concerned with two catalog codes only, that is Ranganathan's Classified Catalog Code, CCC, and Anglo-American Cataloging Rules, AACR-2R. Definition and concept of author. The author is the producer of thought. In other words, he is the person or body who has written the document and responsibility for its thought content or intellectual content. The definition of author is given in various catalog codes and by various authors of cataloging. AA Code 1908 has defined author as: first, the writer of a book as distinguished from translator, editor, etc. Second, in broader sense, the maker of a book or the person or body immediately responsible for its existence. Thus, a person who collects and puts together the writings of several authors, that is, compiler or editor, may be said to be the author of a collection. Corporate bodies may be considered the authors of publications issued in their names or by their authority. In ALA Rules 1949, author has been defined in two senses. Sense 1, the writer of a work as distinguished from the translator, editor, etc. By extension, an artist, composer, photographer, cartographer, etc. In sense 2, it has been defined as, in the broader sense, the maker of a work or a person or body immediately responsible for its existence. Thus, a person who collects or puts together the writings of several authors, compiler or editor, may be said to be the author of a collection. A corporate body may be considered the author of a publication issued in its name or by its authority. According to Mann, in a broad sense, the author is the writer of the book or the person or body immediately responsible for its existence. Thus, a person who collects and puts together the writings of several authors, compiler or editor, may be said to be the author of a collection, even though he has not actually written the text. Corporate bodies such as societies, firms, institutions, etc. may be considered authors of publications issued in their names or by their authority. Ranganathan, in his CCC, has defined author of a work in two senses. In sense 1, person creating a work, that is, the thought and expression constituting it. In second sense, he has defined corporate body owning responsibility for a work, that is, for the thought and expression constituting it. If we analyze this definition, we find: first, author is the creator of the work. Second, it is responsible for the thought, content, and its expression in a work. And third, it may be a person or body. AACR 1967 defines author as the person or corporate body chiefly responsible for the creation of the intellectual or artistic content of a work. For example, the writer of a book, the compiler of a bibliography, the composer of a musical work, the artist who paints a picture, the photographer who takes a photographer. Thus, both the person and the corporate body are regarded as authors in both of the above codes. In other words, the authors may be divided into two broad categories. First is personal author, second is corporate authors. Definition of concept of author in AACR-2R. AACR-2R has not given the definition of author. It has given the definition of personal author only. A personal author is the person chiefly responsible for the creation of the intellectual or artistic content of a work. For example, writers of books and composer of music are the authors of the works they create. Compiler of bibliographies are the authors of these bibliographies. Cartographers are the authors of their maps, and artists and photographers the authors of the works they create. In addition, In certain cases, performers are the authors of sound recordings, films, and video recordings. Through the analysis of various codes, we can generalize that the author is one who is responsible for a work or who creates a work, or in other words, the author is considered to be a person or body chiefly responsible for the intellectual content of the book, literary, artistic, or musical, etc. In case of AACR-2R, the most notable point is that it does not recognize the concept of corporate authorship as recognized by AACR 1967, quoted above. That is why it has not defined the term author and corporate author. No doubt, it has given the definition of corporate body under AACR-2R rule number 21.1b1 and recommends to enter a work emanating from one or more corporate bodies under the heading for the appropriate corporate body under certain conditions, rule number 21.b2. According to AA Code 1908 and ALA Rules 1949, the person or the body immediately responsible for the existence of the work is also taken to be the author. For example, a person who collects and puts together the works of several authors, compiler or editor, can be said to be author of a collection. But an editor or a compiler is no way responsible for the thought and expression containing the different works in the collection. In such cases, the writers of different parts are the authors. AA Code 1908, ALA Code 1949 and CCC all prescribe in such cases the editors or compilers as headings of their main entries, while the actual authors already exist. This feature raises the question why these codes prescribe in such cases to use editors or compilers as a heading of main entries while actual authors exist. CCC has safeguarded itself from this criticism by prescribing to add the descriptive element editor or compiler with the name. An editor or compiler is in no case as author. He is to be used as heading for the sake of convenience or in the absence of any other better solution. Probably this seems to be a reason that in ACR 1967 the concept of principal author and in ACR-2R the concept of principal responsibility has been developed, which includes all the works of shared authorship or shared responsibility, works of joint authorship, works for which different authors have prepared separate contributions, etc. According to ACR-2R, if in such works principal responsibility is indicated or attributed to one person or body, then these are to be entered under the heading for that person or body. If principal responsibility is attributed to two or three persons or bodies, enter under the heading for the first named of these. If principal responsibility is not indicated and attributed and responsibility is shared between two or three persons or bodies, enter under the heading for the one named first. If responsibility is shared between more than three persons or corporate bodies and principal responsibility is not attributed to any one of them, two or three enter under the title. Conflict of authorship. Introduction. There are several problems connected with authorship, but the most important and baffling of them is conflict of authorship. Conflict of authorship arises when there are more than one claimant for authorship of a particular document. In some cases, it is most difficult to decide the authorship because to determine the primary responsibility is not easy to decide. The other important fact is that no code can provide rules to cover all such cases. Only some guidelines may be provided by the catalog codes. The major issues dealt with in CCC under this head are being enumerated below. First, person versus person. Second, person versus corporate body. Third, government versus institution. Fourth, ecclesiastical polity. Fifth, institution versus institution. Sixth, delegated from body versus delegated to body. Seventh, legal publications. Eighth, author's name merged in the title. It will be appropriate to point out here that in the above list, conflict number 3, 5 and 6 may be jointly headed as corporate body versus corporate body. In the same way, there may be many divisions of person versus corporate body, such as person versus government, person versus institution, person versus conference. Out of these conflicts, Ranganathan has separately discussed person versus conference. Moreover, Ranganathan has made a separate category for author's name merged in the title, which would have been included in person versus person. We do not find any such list in AACR-2R, but its framers were aware of this problem and have provided rules to solve it. Most of them are covered under the heading Works of Mixed Responsibility and Related Works. Solution of problem. The problem of conflict of authorship can be best solved at the level of definition of author. Ranganathan in his CCC has followed this prescription and has given a list of such works which with solution in his CCC chapter GB. That is why in preceding sections the concept of author has been discussed vividly. AACR-2R has also provided a good solution to resolve these conflicts in its own way under different headings. Person versus person. In several documents, we may find more than one personal name in the title page or author statements. These persons are not joint authors and collaborators. In such cases, the role of each person in the creation of the work may be helpful to decide the authorship, and the credit of authorship may be given to the person whose role is basic and more important. Ranganathan has resolved the conflict entitled Person versus Person in his CCC in chapter GB. AACR-2R, most of them are covered under the headings Works of Mixed Responsibility, Rule number 21.8 and Related Works, Rule number 21.28. The various categories of this type of conflicts are enumerated below with their solutions and references of rules of CCC and AACR-2R. Problem solution in CCC and AACR-2R. First, original author or reviser. Solution in CCC, original author as per rule number GB 5. Original author as per ACR rule number 21.12. Original author or translator. Original author as rule number GB 5. Original author as per ACR rule number 21.14. Original author or adapter. Original author as per rule GB 5. Adapter as rule number 21.10 of ACR. Original author or abridger. Original author as per CCC rule number GB 5. Original author as per ACR rule number 21.12. Original author or paraphraser. Original author as per rule number GB5 not included in ACR. Collection or selection of works of an author. Original author CCC rule number GB5. Original author ACR rule number 25.10. Original author or commentator if the commentator is of importance. Commentator rule number GB6 of CCC. Commentator ACR rule number 21.13. Original author or concordance writer. Concordance writer as per rule GB6 under its own heading, that is concordance writer rule number 21.28. Original author or continuer. Continuer CC rule number GB6. Continuer ACR rule number 28. Original author or dramatizer. Dramatizer CC rule number GB6. ACR rule number 21.10 under dramatizer. Original author or imitation writer. Imitation writer CCC rule number GB6. ACR rule number 21.10 under imitation writer. Dramatist or libretto writer. Libretto writer as per CCC rule number GB6 and libretto writer as per ACR rule number 21.28. Original author or indexer. Indexer CCC rule number GB6. Indexer ACR rule number 21.28. Poet or music setter. Music setter CCC rule number GB6. Music setter or composer rule number ACR 21.20. Original author or novelizer. Novelizer CCC rule number GB6. Novelizer ACR rule number 21.10. Original author or parody writer. Parody writer CCC rule number GB6. In ACR no rule is given. Original author or sequel writer. Sequel writer CCC rule number GB6. Sequel writer ACR rule number 21.28. Original author or supplement writer. Supplement writer CCC rule number GB6. Supplement writer ACR rule number 21.28. Original author or versificationist. Versificationist in CCC, in ACR2 versificationist. Cartographer or writer of text. Cartographer CCC rule number GB3. Cartographer ACR rule number 21.1A1. Anna table talk. Talker CCC rule number GB1. Principal participant ACR rule number 21.25. Dialogue participants CCC rule number GB1. Principal participant ACR rule number 21.25. Interview interviewee CCC rule number GB1. Principal participant ACR rule number 21.25. Lecture lecturer GB1 of CCC rule. Principal participant ACR rule number 21.25. Narration real not fictitious. Narrator CCC rule number GB1. Principal participant ACR rule number 21.25. Correspondence of one person with many persons. One person CCC rule number GB2. Principal author ACR rule number 21.6B1. Correspondence between two or more persons to be treated as work of joint authorship. CCC rule number GB2. Principal author ACR rule number 21.6B1. Person versus corporate body. Probably the most important and confusing conflict is person versus corporate body. Ranganathan, long before the publication of AACR-2R, resolved the problem of conflict between person versus corporate body in his CCC as following. The work in the document is of corporate authorship if it is of a deliberative, legislative, directive, judicial, administrative, or routine character limited by the purpose or function or outlook of the corporate body. The mere fact that a document is published, financed, aided, approved, sponsored, or authorized by a corporate body is not sufficient reason to deem the work in it to be of corporate authorship and not to be of personal authorship under CCC rule number GC31. Person versus corporate body. The work in the documents is of personal authorship if its primary function is the extension of the boundary of a field of knowledge or its intensification, and the responsibility for the thought and expression of it rests on the person and not on the office held by him in the corporate body, in spite of his being a paid or honorary employee or a member of the corporate body. The mere mention of the personal name of an official of the corporate body in the place in which author's name is usually mentioned in a book is not sufficient reason to deem the work in it to be of personal authorship and not be of corporate authorship. CCC rule number GC32. Hence, according to Ranganathan, the main criteria are as follows. First, the nature of work first may be of routine type, or second, its function may be the extension of boundary of a field of knowledge or its intensification. Second, the responsibility for the thought and its expression. Draper has suggested to reduce the corporate empire as well as improve its laws. He advocated entry under a personal author whenever possible, only turning to corporate entry as a last resort. In the opinion of Joly, always enter under a personal author or title except when the name associated with the work is clearly that of a corporate body. Lubezki proposed the principle of only entering under the corporate body publications issued in its name and representing its collective thought. The views of Draper, Joly, Besselbeskia, as well as Ranganathan and Lubezki are all reflected in AACR 1967 and AACR-2R. According to AACR-2R, rule number 21.1b2, enter a work emanating from one or more corporate bodies under the heading for the appropriate corporate body if it falls into one or more of the following categories. A. Those of an administrative nature dealing with the corporate body itself or its internal policies, procedures and our operations, or its finances, or its officer or staff, or its resources, for example, catalogs, inventories, membership, directories, etc. D. Some legal and government works. As far as the idea of emanating is concerned, AACR-2R has given a note on page 313 as follows. Consider a work to have emanated from a corporate body if it is issued by the body or has been caused to be issued by that body or if it is originated with that body. Further, according to AACR-2R, rule number 21.4d1, official communications enter under the corporate heading for the official works that fall into the following categories. A. Official communications from heads of the states, heads of the governments, and head of international bodies. For example, messages to legislatures, proclamations, and executive orders other than those covered under Rule 21.31. Official communications from popes, patriarchs, bishops, etc. For example, orders, decrees, pastoral letters, official messages to councils, synods, etc., bulls, encyclicals, and consultations. According to AACR-2, rule number 21.4d2, other works enter all other works of such a person under the personal heading. Make an explanatory reference from the corporate heading to the personal heading. Comments. Both the codes CCC and AACR-2R have provided sufficient guidance for the determination of the author in the case of the conflict person versus corporate body. As pointed out earlier, AACR-2R does not recognize the concept of corporate authorship and has not provided the definition of corporate author. But the code has provided the operational definition of corporate responsibility and has given ample well-defined examples. For example, rule number 21.1b2 of ACR-2R. The other point is that the work must have emanated from the corporate body. CCC has tried to resolve the conflict on the basis of responsibility for thought and expression constituting the work. Ranganathan has suggested to apply the canon of ascertainability in such cases, but it can be said unhesitatingly that the cataloger faces many problems in the practical application of the rules of both the codes. Person versus government. Section JC4 of CCC guides us to resolve this kind of conflict. Corporate heading is to be used only in case of official publications such as messages, proclamations, dispatches, ordinances, and so on, emanating from the head of the government. It is not applicable to works written by a king, a president, etc. in his private capacity. The similar provisions we find in AACR-2R under rule number 21.4d1 quoted earlier. Person versus conference. Ranganathan has especially dealt with this conflict. According to American and British practices, such works are entered under the heading of the conference. Ranganathan does not agree with this view. CCC section GC5 has prescribed a conference is deemed author only of its agenda, minutes, resolutions, report of proceedings, and similar collective created thought, but a collection of learned papers or memoranda presented by persons or corporate bodies at the conference is deemed to have respective person or body or bodies as author or authors. ACR-2R rule number 21.1b2 prescribes enter a work emanating from one or more corporate bodies under the heading of the appropriate corporate body if it falls into one or more of the following categories. D. Those that report the collective activity of a conference, proceedings, collected papers, etc. Comments. In this case of conflict, CCC goes strictly by the question of responsibility for thought and expression, constituting the work, which is quite logical, while ACR-2R seems to follow the approach of readers or Ranganathan's canon of shortheading, as most of the readers are likely to look under the name of the conference for such kinds of works rather than under editor or compiler. Corporate body versus corporate body. Just like person versus person, one main category of conflict may be named as corporate body versus corporate body. In this category comes subordinate bodies, related bodies, affiliated bodies, etc. Some of them are discussed below. Government versus institution. Many of the institutions are either owned by government or financed by government. In some of the cases, it becomes difficult to decide whether those should be entered as an organ of it or independent of it. CCC chapter GD is concerned with the conflict, namely corporate body versus corporate body. Conflict, namely government versus institution, comes in this category. CCC section GD2 prescribes that if the work relates to the primary function of a government or any of its organ, it is to be taken as that of government authorship. According to CCC section GD3, an autonomous or even non-autonomous organization engaged in the work of research, production, commerce, and supply of commodities and service to the public may have to be taken to be the institutional author for a work for whose thought and expression it is responsible. It is so even if the institution is owned and managed by the government. In CCC section GD8, a list of institutions is given which should be taken as authors independent of their parent bodies. As already pointed out, earlier AACR-2R does not recognize the concept of corporate authorship but prescribes entries under corporate bodies in specific circumstances. According to AACR-2R rule number 24.1, enter a corporate body directly under the name by which it is predominantly identified, except when the rule that follows provide for entering it under the name of a higher body, see rule number 24.13, or under the name of a government, see rule number 24.18. AACR-2R has also provided ample guidance illustrating through sufficient examples to deal with this problem under rule number 21.1b2, 21.b4, 21.6b1, 21.6b2, 21.6c1, 21.6c2, 21.8a, and 21.10 to 21.27. In this case of conflict, also, cataloger faces many problems to resolve the conflict, and he has to use his own sense of judgment. Institution versus institution or subordinate and related bodies. CCC section JD4 refers to rule number GD8 for determining whether the name of the body will be rendered as if it were organ of a parent body or an independent corporate body. Under rule number GD8, a list of bodies have been provided which will be taken as author independent of parent body. AACR-2R rule number 21.1b4 states if a work falls into one or more of the categories given in rule number 21.b2 and if a subordinate unit of a corporate body is responsible for it, apply the following provisions. If the responsibility of the named subordinate unit is stated prominently, enter the work under the heading for the subordinate unit. If the responsibility of the named subordinate unit is not stated prominently, or if the parent body is named in the chief source of information and the subordinate unit is not, or if the subordinate unit has no name, enter the work under the heading for the parent body. Comments. For this conflict, the main guidance has been quoted above. By critical examination of both the codes, we find that CCC has taken into consideration the cataloging conventions. It is easier to decide whether the author of the work is parent body or an organ of it. Similar is the case with the parent body and a dependent or affiliated institution. By listing corporate bodies under section GD8, it has made the task of cataloger easier. No doubt, complications are created by the instruction of the concept of distinctive name. As far as AACR-2R is concerned, the rules are scattered and quite difficult to apply. Delegation from body versus delegated to body. CCC section GD7 prescribes to enter delegations to a conference or to a body such as UN etc. under delegated from body. According to AACR-2R rule number 24.26, enter a delegation, commission etc. representing a country in an international or intergovernmental body, conference, undertaking etc. as a subheading of the heading for the country represented. Comments. In this case of conflict, we find that both the courts have followed the concept of authorship, that is principle of responsibility for the thought content and its expression in the work. Author's name merged in the title. In the field of natural sciences, social sciences, and technical subjects, some books become very popular and long-lasting among readers. Hence, their successive editions are brought out, but due to modern developments and researches, the original text of these documents become old, obsolete, and out of date. In such books, the author has to make ample changes in the text to make it up to date. Sometimes he may rewrite it totally if the work is done by the person other than author. He may merge the name of the original author in the title due to his basic contribution to pay homage to him or to reap the advantage of his popularity. For example, see the following titles. Title number 1, Green's Manual of Pathology, 14th edition, completely revised and enlarged by A. Pinne. Note, the preface of 14th edition mentions the death of Dr. Thomas Henry Green. Second example is Sears List of Subject Headings, 7th edition by Bertha Margaret Frick. In the title pages of both these books, the names of original author has been merged in the respective titles. In the first case, the other person has mentioned himself as reviser and rewriter, while in the second case, the other person has mentioned herself as author in the author statement. In case of such a situation, it becomes difficult to determine the authorship. Ranganathan, in his CCC under section G5 states, the safest course to determine the choice of heading is to rely on the canon of ascertainability, that is, by what is indicated in the title page, rather than sit in judgment over what is given in the title page. Hence, according to CCC, in these cases, A. Pinne and Bertha Margaret Frick, respectively, should be taken as authors. But in later times, the view of Ranganathan seems to have been changed. Hence, he has suggested that if the other person declares himself as author, then only the book should be entered under his name. Otherwise, it should be entered under the name of original author. If this course is followed, the first book will be entered under Thomas Henry Green and the second book under Bertha Margaret Frick. According to AACR-2R rule number 21.12a, which is applicable in such cases, enter an edition that has been revised, enlarged, updated, abridged, condensed, etc. under the heading for the original if the person or body responsible for the original is named in the statement of responsibility in the title. AACR-2R rule number 21.12b, if the wording of the chief source of information indicates that the person or body responsible for the original is no longer considered to be responsible for the work, enter under the revisor, etc. Comments. If we apply these two rules for the above publications, the first book should be entered under Thomas Henry Green and second book under Bertha Margaret Frick. Hence, we find identical treatment in both the codes. But no doubt, the different catalogers may not reach at the same decision in such cases. So, students, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. In spite of popularity of subject approach, the author approach is still the most potent approach of the users to find out desired document through catalogs. There are several problems of author catalog, but the most important and baffling of them is conflict of authorship, which may be of several kinds. Out of them, the most important ones are person versus person and person versus corporate body. CCC and AACR-2R both have given sufficient thought to this problem and have provided ample guidance. Still, all the problems cannot be covered by any code. Hence, the cataloger has to use his own sense of judgment to tackle this problem. Thanks.